What's up guys, I'm Behrad and welcome to episode 2 of our 1JZ S13 Swap. In this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 things that you must check on your imported engine before you throw it in your car. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to check is the spark plugs. Pretty easy to check. We're going to take off our cover. And I had the coil packs and the harnesses in here, which I already pulled, so whatever kind of engine you have, you're gonna have either some sort of coil pack or coil on plug or distributor, plugs, wires, whatever it is. You wanna pull that stuff off, access your spark plugs. All right, so we're gonna start with cylinder 1. Once you got the spark plugs out, there's a few things that you want to look for. Excessive oil, fuel, whatever is never great, but a little bit is not a bad thing. You also want to look for what kind of color is at the tip of the spark plug. If it's super white, it means that it could have been running really hot and the engine could have been lean. If it's super black, that could mean that it was running rich and you got some carbon buildup. You want to look for anything like a broken ground electrode, which is the curved piece at the top, or the actual electrode in the center. If the tips of either of those are blown off, that could mean something like pre-detonation or again, the engine running hot, things like that. Another thing you want to look for is any signs of cracks in the ceramic part of the spark plug. So kind of on the back side, you'll just inspect it, make sure you don't see any hairline fractures or cracks going up, because that could potentially lead to breaking further and having a big problem. So these spark plugs all look pretty good, and honestly, if I didn't have some new ones to put in, I would rerun these because they don't look that old at all. But nevertheless, I want to be on the safe side, so I bought some brand new NGK ones, some iridium, so I'm going to swap those in. But again, you just want to check to make sure you don't have any major malfunctions with any of the spark plugs, and it tells you a lot about how the engine was running. And in this scenario, looks like the engine was running pretty healthy. All right, so the second thing you want to check on any engine is the compression. Now, when I bought this from the importer, they did the compression test for me, so we're not going to do it again. There's a million videos of showing you how to do a compression test, so I will have you guys do your own research on how to do it. But essentially, a compression test can tell you a ton about the engine. In our case, this thing had really consistent compression numbers. If you put oil down the spark plug holes, that's gonna always make your compression read a little bit higher, and it's gonna kind of make the tolerances be a little tighter because you have oil in there kind of sealing the rings. When they compression tested this one, there was oil in there and it read, high, but it read consistent across the board. So that's one thing you want. If you had 6 cylinders and you have 180, 180, 180, 140, 180, 180, that's not good. You got one cylinder that's down. But if they're all kind of across the board the same or similar, within about 10% of each other, that's always good. Now with low compression, it could mean a few different things. You could have rings that are not sealed properly, you can have a melted piston, you can have all sorts of bottom end damage. It kind of is hard to tell until you break it down. Wherever you're buying your engine, whether it's an importer or it's a local dismantler, whatever it is, try to have them do your compression test for you before you buy it, because buying an engine with low compression, you're already asking for trouble. So make sure that they're willing to do a compression test for you before you buy the engine, and make sure the numbers are consistent and you don't have any dead cylinders. All right guys, the third thing to check is underneath the valve covers. You can get a little bit of information about the head and how the valves are, how the camshafts look, just by taking your valve covers off. So let's get these off. First off, we're gonna talk about the smell, all right? Now, I wish you guys could smell this because it doesn't smell very good. Not in a huge bad way, but basically, I call it the dinosaur smell, and what that means is old, fossil fuels, kind of like old oil, right? That's the dinosaur smell. Depending on if your engine was imported and it was sitting in a crate for a long time, it could kind of just smell old because it's just been sitting. Now let's get in here and look at the camshafts. It doesn't look too bad in here. It's a little dirty. It's just a little burnt looking with this like kind of orangish color. But again, it's just been sitting for a long time. Now these lobes on the camshafts here, you want to look out for things like big pit marks and anything that looks like there was, you know, contact without oil. And it doesn't look like it. These all look pretty good. The next thing you want to check with the valve covers is if your valve cover gaskets are leaking. Now, on the edges of where the gaskets go, you want to look for oil that's been pushed out from between the gasket and the valve cover. In my case, there is some leakage kind of up here. All right, last thing you can check with the valve covers off is just to kind of see if your cam caps are all still torqued down sometimes. I don't know if it's common with this engine, but in a lot of engines, it can happen where the cam cap bolts can back themselves out. So you just want to make sure all your cam caps are good. They look like they're all even so that your cam is sitting perfectly flat. All right, guys, the fourth thing that you want to check is the oil filter. So we're going to start with draining the oil, flip it over, and we'll pull the oil filter off. All right, guys, to cut this thing open, we're gonna use an angle grinder. Make sure you got some eye protection. Ear protection is good as well. All right, let's crack her open. Let's take this thing back over by the workbench. All right, guys, I'm gonna pull the filter out. And we're basically just inspecting for metal shavings, large shards of metal, anything that looks like it could be destructive to your engine. Alright guys, as you can see, when you split the oil filter and kind of spread it out like this is where you would see big chunks of metal. And in this one here, looks pretty good. I don't see any big flakes. I don't see any like metallic-y looking, glitter in the oil or in my fingers. Now this is kind of a messy job, but it's not too difficult, and honestly it tells you a lot about the engine. So in our case, no metal shavings means that the main bearings are good, the cams are good, there's not a lot of metal being blown around through the entire engine, so good sign. Alright guys, with the oil filter out of the way, it brings us to number 5 on our list, which is to pull the oil pan. The bottom of the engine looks pretty clean actually. I don't see a lot of metal flaking around in the oil. It's not glistening too bad. As for the oil pan, there are some deposits in here, but after kind of checking them a little bit more, it's not metal. It's just kind of like carbon buildup, just probably from sitting for so long. So that's also a good sign. Now, if you did find a bunch of metal in here or a bunch of metal over there or in your strainer or something, that could be signs of bearing failure, ring failure, something like that. In which case you definitely want to dig a little further and, maybe do a rebuild or something like that. So in our case though, pretty good, no metal, which means we can slap this back on and it should be fine. All right, guys, so that concludes our top 5 things that you must check on your engine if you imported it or picked it up from a scrapyard or something like that. Now, as a bonus, we do have a 6th one. This is for engines that are turbocharged, like my 1JZ. One easy thing to check is if there's any shaft play. Now, we already checked the shaft play on this turbo when we installed my Future Fab downpipe, but this T25 turbo here has a bunch of shaft play, so I want to show you guys what that looks like. Now, shaft play can be bad for your turbo because what happens is the fins on your propeller here will actually rub on the outsides of the housing of the turbo, which isn't good. It ends up eating the propeller and can send metal through the turbo, so all bad. And you'll get, oil going through it, blow by, and things like that. So you don't want shaft play on your turbo. All right, guys, if you made it this far, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Go down below, leave a like if you enjoyed it, and make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. We have a lot more stuff to do on this engine, so follow along for the build.
Yeah!